The streets of Washington were alive with the hum of the city, a symphony of car horns, distant chatter, and the occasional siren. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and the faint aroma of street food wafting from a nearby vendor. Elon Musk, dressed in a simple black jacket and jeans, walked briskly down the sidewalk. His mind, as always, was a whirlwind of ideas, rockets, electric cars, neural interfaces. But today, something pulled him out of his thoughts. There, on a bench near the corner of 14th Street, sat a man. His clothes were tattered, barely clinging to his thin frame. His face was weathered, etched with lines that spoke of years spent under the open sky. His hands trembled slightly, not just from the cold but from something deeper, exhaustion, perhaps, or despair. The man's eyes, though tired, held a glimmer of hope as they locked onto Elon's. Elon slowed his pace, his curiosity piqued. He wasn't sure why he stopped. Maybe it was the man's vulnerability, or the stark contrast between his own life and the one before him. As he approached, the man looked up, his breath visible in the chilly air. "Excuse me, sir," the man said, his voice raspy but polite. "Could you spare $10? I need to buy a coat. It's getting colder and His voice trailed off, as if he were ashamed to finish the sentence. Elon paused, studying the man. He had been approached by countless people asking for money before, but this felt different. There was no aggression, no sense of entitlement, just a simple, desperate request. For a moment, Elon's mind raced. He could hand over a $10 bill and walk away, as most people would. But something about this moment felt significant, as if it were a crossroads. "What's your name?" Elon asked, his tone calm but probing. The man hesitated, as if surprised by the question. "James," he said finally. "My name's James." Elon nodded, his gaze softening. "James, it's cold out here. Let me help you." James's eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face. He had expected a quick dismissal, maybe a few coins tossed his way. But this was different. He wasn't sure what to make of it. Elon reached into his pocket, not for his wallet, but for his phone. He typed a quick message, his fingers moving swiftly over the screen. Then he looked back at James. "Wait here," he said. "I'll be right back." Before James could respond, Elon turned and walked away, his pace quickening as he headed toward a nearby clothing store. James watched him go, confusion and hope warring within him. He wrapped his arms around himself, trying to ward off the cold, and wondered what would happen next. The city continued to buzz around him, oblivious to the small but profound moment that had just unfolded. For James, it felt like the world had paused, if only for a second. And for Elon, it was the beginning of something he hadn't anticipated, a chance to make a difference in a way he hadn't imagined. Elon Musk moved with purpose, his mind already calculating the quickest route to the nearest store. He wasn't one to act impulsively, but something about James's plea had struck a chord deep within him. It wasn't just about the $10 or the coat, it was about the humanity of the moment, the raw vulnerability of someone who had nothing left to lose. For a man who spent his days thinking about the future of humanity, this was a stark reminder of the present. He spotted a small boutique a block away, its windows displaying a variety of winter wear. Without hesitation, he pushed the door open, the bell above it jingling softly. The store was warm, a stark contrast to the chilly streets outside. A sales associate approached him, her smile fading slightly as she recognized him. "Mr. Musk," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "I need a coat," Elon said, cutting straight to the point. "Something warm, durable, and in a large size. And gloves, a scarf, and a hat too. Quickly, please." The associate nodded, her professionalism kicking in despite her surprise. She hurried to the racks, pulling out a heavy-duty winter coat, thick gloves, a woolen scarf, and a beanie. Elon inspected them briefly, his mind already racing ahead. He handed her his card without asking for the price. "Keep the change," he said as he grabbed the items and turned to leave. The associate stared after him, still processing what had just happened. Back on the street, Elon moved swiftly, the bag of clothing swinging at his side. His breath came out in small clouds as he jogged back to where James was waiting. The man was still on the bench, his arms wrapped tightly around himself, his shoulders hunched against the cold. When he saw Elon approaching, his eyes widened in surprise. "Here," Elon said, handing the bag to James. "This should keep you warm." James hesitated, his hands trembling as he reached for the bag. He opened it slowly, as if afraid it might disappear. Inside, he found the coat, gloves, scarf, and hat. For a moment, he just stared, his eyes filling with tears. I don't know what to say," James stammered, his voice breaking. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Elon nodded, his expression softening. "Put it on," he said. "It's cold out here." James stood up, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he were afraid to damage the gift. He slipped the coat on, the warmth enveloping him immediately. The gloves, scarf, and hat followed, each item bringing a little more comfort, a little more hope. For the first time in what felt like forever, James felt human again. "Why? Why are you doing this?" James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't even know me." Elon shrugged, his gaze distant for a moment. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe because I can. Maybe because it's the right thing to do. Or maybe—" He paused, as if searching for the right words. "Maybe because I've been so focused on the future that I forgot about the present. About people like you." James looked down, his hands gripping the edges of the coat. "I don't know how to repay you," he said quietly. "You don't have to," Elon replied. "But tell me, James, where do you sleep? Do you have a place to stay?" James shook his head, his eyes downcast. "No," he said. "I've been on the streets for a while now. It's hard to get back on your feet when you've got nothing." Elon frowned, his mind already working through the problem. He pulled out his phone again, typing a quick message. Then he looked back at James. "Come with me," he said. "I'll take you somewhere safe." James hesitated, uncertainty flickering across his face. I don't want to be a burden," he said. "You're not," Elon replied firmly. "Let's go." The two men walked down the street together, the contrast between them impossible to ignore. One was a billionaire, a man who had reshaped industries and dreamed of colonizing Mars. The other was a homeless man, invisible to most, struggling to survive. Yet in that moment, they were just two people, connected by a simple act of kindness. As they approached a sleek black SUV parked nearby, Elon's security team stepped forward, their expressions unreadable behind their sunglasses. Elon gestured to James. "This is James. He's coming with us." The security team nodded, opening the door for both men. James climbed in hesitantly, his eyes wide as he took in the luxurious interior. Elon slid in beside him, his mind already racing ahead to the next steps. The SUV pulled away from the curb, merging into the flow of traffic. James sat quietly, his hands resting on his knees, the new coat still wrapped tightly around him. He glanced at Elon, who was staring out the window, lost in thought. "Where are we going?" James asked finally, his voice tinged with both hope and fear. Elon turned to him, a small smile playing on his lips. "Somewhere better," he said. "Somewhere you can start over." James didn't respond, his mind struggling to process what was happening. For so long, life had been a series of hardships, one after another. But now, for the first time in years, he dared to hope. The SUV continued its journey through the city, the streets blurring past the windows. For James, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter, one he hadn't dared to imagine. And for Elon, it was a reminder that even the smallest actions could have a profound impact. But this was only the beginning. The road ahead was uncertain, and both men knew that challenges lay ahead. Yet in that moment, as the city lights flickered past, there was a sense of possibility, a glimmer of hope that things could, and would, get better. The SUV glided smoothly through the streets of Washington, its tinted windows shielding its occupants from the prying eyes of the outside world. Inside, James sat quietly, his hands gripping the edge of the seat, his mind racing with a mix of disbelief and cautious hope. The warmth of the coat still enveloped him, a stark contrast to the cold he had grown so accustomed to. He glanced at Elon Musk, who was typing something on his phone, his expression focused yet calm. Where are we going? James asked again, his voice trembling slightly. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was all a dream, that at any moment, he would wake up back on the bench, shivering and alone. Elon looked up from his phone, his gaze steady. I have a few properties in the city, he said. One of them is a small apartment not far from here. It's empty right now. You can stay there. James blinked, his heart pounding in his chest. You're giving me an apartment? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elon nodded. It's not much, but it's a start. You'll have a roof over your head, a place to sleep, and a chance to get back on your feet. James stared at him, his mind struggling to process the words. 4 years, he had been invisible, a ghost drifting through the streets, ignored by most and forgotten by the rest. And now, this man, this billionaire who had no reason to care, was offering him a lifeline. It was too much to take in. I don't know what to say, James stammered, his voice breaking. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. Elon leaned back in his seat, his expression thoughtful. Maybe because I can, he said simply. Maybe because I've been lucky in life, and I believe in paying it forward. Or maybe, he paused, his gaze distant for a moment. Maybe because I see something in you. A spark, a will to survive, and I think you deserve a chance. James looked down, his hands trembling. He wanted to believe it, to accept this gift without question. But years of hardship had taught him to be wary, to expect disappointment. What's the catch? He asked quietly. Elon chuckled softly, a hint of amusement in his eyes. No catch, he said. Just a chance. A fresh start. What you do with it is up to you. The SUV pulled into a quiet residential neighborhood, the buildings a mix of modern apartments and historic townhouses. It stopped in front of a sleek mid-rise building with large windows and a well-maintained facade. Elon stepped out of the vehicle, and James followed, his legs feeling unsteady beneath him. The security team escorted them inside, the lobby warm and inviting, with soft lighting and polished floors. They took the elevator to the 5th floor, where Elon led James down a hallway to a door marked 504. He unlocked it and stepped aside, gesturing for James to enter. The apartment was modest but well-furnished, with a cozy living room, a small kitchen, and a bedroom with a large window that offered a view of the city. James stood in the doorway, his eyes wide as he took it all in. It was more than he had dared to hope for, more than he had ever had. This is mine, James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elon nodded. It's yours, he said. I'll have the paperwork drawn up. You can stay here as long as you need. James stepped inside, his hands brushing against the furniture as if to confirm it was real. He turned to Elon, tears streaming down his face. Thank you, he said, his voice choked with emotion. Thank you so much. I don't know how to repay you. Elon shook his head. You don't have to repay me, he said. But I do want to help you get back on your feet. I'll arrange for you to meet with someone who can help you find a job. Something stable, with room to grow. You'll have a chance to rebuild your life. James nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Elon handed him a set of keys and a small card with a phone number on it. This is my assistant's number, he said. If you need anything, call her. She'll take care of it. James took the keys and the card, his hands trembling. I won't let you down, he said, his voice firm despite the tears in his eyes. Elon smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. I know you won't, he said. Take care of yourself, James. And remember, this is just the beginning. With that, Elon turned and left, the door closing softly behind him. James stood in the middle of the apartment, the silence wrapping around him like a warm blanket. He looked around, taking in the space that was now his. It was more than just an apartment, it was a second chance, a new beginning. He walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. The streets were alive with movement, people going about their lives, unaware of the small miracle that had just taken place. For James, it felt like the world had shifted, like the weight of his past had been lifted, if only for a moment. He sat down on the couch, his mind racing with possibilities. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face it. He had a roof over his head, a place to call his own, and a chance to start over. And for now, that was enough. As the sun set over the city, casting a warm glow through the window, James allowed himself to hope. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't alone anymore. And that made all the difference. The story of James and Elon Musk was far from over. It was a story of redemption, of second chances, and of the power of kindness. And as the night settled over the city, it was clear that this was only the beginning. A month had passed since James moved into the apartment. The days had blurred together in a whirlwind of adjustments, small victories, and moments of quiet reflection. For the first time in years, James had a routine, a sense of stability that he had almost forgotten was possible. He woke up each morning in a warm bed, made coffee in the small but functional kitchen, and spent his days looking for work, attending job interviews, and slowly rebuilding his life. The apartment had become a sanctuary, a place where he could breathe and think without the constant weight of survival pressing down on him. He kept it tidy, almost obsessively so, as if maintaining order in his surroundings would help him maintain order in his mind. The walls were bare, but he didn't mind. The space itself was enough. On a crisp afternoon, as James was preparing a simple lunch, there was a knock at the door. He paused, his heart skipping a beat. He wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, he approached the door and peered through the peephole. Standing outside was Elon Musk, dressed casually in a jacket and jeans, his hands tucked into his pockets. James opened the door, his surprise evident. "Mr. Musk," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. I wasn't expecting you." Elon smiled, his expression warm but slightly guarded. "I was in the neighborhood," he said. "Thought I'd check in and see how you're doing." James stepped aside, gesturing for Elon to come in. "Please come in. It's not much, but it's home." Elon stepped inside, his eyes scanning the apartment. It was clean and orderly, a stark contrast to the chaos he had seen in James's life just a month ago. He nodded approvingly. "You've done well," he said. "It looks good." James shrugged, a hint of pride in his eyes. "I've been trying to keep it together," he said. It's been a lot to adjust to, but I'm getting there." Elon walked over to the window, looking out at the view of the city. "How's the job search going?" he asked, his tone casual but interested. James hesitated, then nodded. "It's going," he said. "I've had a few interviews. Nothing solid yet, but I'm hopeful." Elon turned to face him, his expression thoughtful. "That's good," he said. "It takes time. But you're putting in the effort, and that's what matters." James nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. I don't want to let you down," he said quietly. "You've done so much for me. I want to make sure it wasn't for nothing." Elon stepped closer, his voice firm but kind. "You're not letting me down," he said. "This isn't about me. It's about you. You're the one doing the work. I just gave you a push." James looked up, his eyes meeting Elon's. There was a moment of silence, a shared understanding that words couldn't fully capture. Then James smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." Elon nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "You're welcome," he said. "But like I said, this is just the beginning. You've got a long road ahead, but I think you're ready for it." James took a deep breath, his chest swelling with a mix of gratitude and determination. "I am," he said, "and I won't waste this chance. I promise." Elon clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture of encouragement. "I know you won't," he said. "Keep pushing forward. And if you need anything, Don't hesitate to reach out. James nodded, his resolve strengthening. I will, he said. Thank you, Mr. Musk. For everything. Elon smiled again, then turned to leave. Take care of yourself, James, he said as he walked to the door. I'll check in again soon. As the door closed behind Elon, James stood in the middle of the apartment, a sense of calm settling over him. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face it. He had a roof over his head, a place to call his own, and a chance to start over. And for now, that was enough. The story of James and Elon Musk was far from over. It was a story of redemption, of second chances, and of the power of kindness. And as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, it became clear that this was only the beginning. James walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. The streets were alive with movement, people going about their lives, unaware of the small miracle that had taken place in this modest apartment. For James, it felt like the world had shifted, like the weight of his past had been lifted, if only for a moment. He sat down on the couch, his mind racing with possibilities. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face it. He had a roof over his head, a place to call his own, and a chance to start over. And for now, that was enough. As the sun set over the city, casting a warm glow through the window, James allowed himself to hope. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't alone anymore. And that made all the difference.